Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Questions and Answers. We have tons of questions to go through. For those of you who are new to this is where I am going through all of your submitted questions and doing my best to answer them accurately or making up something and then forcing you to go research it. Okay? So let's cue the intro. Oh, really? Okay. Apparently, we don't have enough money for an intro, so let's just get started. I'm going to go do all the 8th grade questions first, then 7th grade, then 6th grade questions on Google Classroom. If you are watching this and you forgot to put a question as your attendance assignment, go on back and put it on the Google Classroom question, okay, from Monday. So let's start with talking about fascism in World War II. 8th graders had questions like, what was the Iron Cross and how did Adolf Hitler earn it? The Iron Cross is kind of like the German version of the Medal of Honor during World War I, and Hitler was leading men during a lot of different like trench raids and scouting. I believe he won his Iron Cross because he led a scouting mission over the trenches. Another question. So the video was about examples about fascism before World War II, and so the question is, what are some examples of fascist countries today? You have some examples like true fascism. You have like North Korea. Basically, any dictatorships would fall under fascism. So, like, you could say like Syria and some of the other dictatorships in the Middle East and some of the other underdeveloped world countries. And then you have like a little bit more, I would say, hard to define, like Russia. Even though they say they're a democracy, they're not really a democracy. But true fascism is kind of hard to define sometimes. Another question: how is communism different from fascism? Is China communist or fascist or neither? Let's answer that together. So communism is on the left side of the spectrum, political spectrum. Fascism is on the right side of this political spectrum. The problem with both of them is that when you kind of merge them together, when you look at them and look at the aspects of both of them, you see a lot of similarities. Single party rule, complete rule of the press, anti-religion, things like that. So the problem is that there's not a lot of differences. It's just their origins. Communism comes out of an extremism from socialism, and fascism comes out of an extremism from conservatism and nationalism. Is China communist or fascist or neither? It's kind of a hybrid of communist and totalitarian and a little democracy. Because here's the thing, like in a country, like you're not just one thing. You have elements of a lot of different government styles in your country. What groups in fascist countries were against fascism? Example, middle class or something. Just an example, in Germany, the biggest opponents to the Nazi Party was the Communist Party. The Catholic Church was a big opponent of Hitler for the most part. You had some of the social democrat parties. They were kind of like the liberal parties. They were opposed to him. But the communists were the biggest opponent to fascism. What was Adolf Hitler's rank in the military in World War I? He got to the rank of a corporal. Okay, so it's not a NCO, but he was in charge of a few things, small things. Why did Hitler join the German army during World War I? Well, actually, Hitler's not German. He's Austrian, but instead of joining the Austrian military, he moved over to Germany and joined them. He was kind of a loser. That's kind of the first start with that, because he basically had no job. He did a lot of freelance, like painting and housework and shingling and things like that. And so, like, he had like no job, no prospects, and so he joins the German military out of obviously ultra nationalism, but also because they would feed him. So Why was Germany being hated in World War One? We might need to check our grammar on that one. I'm going to assume that question means why were they being fought against in World War One? Well, we already covered this in my class, but World War One, Germany was looking for expansion. What was the Iron Cross? Already answered that. And how would a country become fascist? What would change in the country? So, kind of similar to what happened in Nazi Germany. It starts off usually through political organization. You don't just kind of snap your fingers and all of a sudden you're a fascist country. As you go through, the fascists would organize their political party. They try to gain as much power as they could by voting. And really, you would have to wait until you had enough political support until you could start implementing the changes that you want. So you really need enough people on your side. So like the Germans, the Nazi Germans had like 34% of the vote at one point, which was enough to become the biggest party in the German parliament. What would change is that you'd see the country go from being a true democracy to a single-party state. That's what Hitler and other dictators would do, is that they would use the parliament to say, hey, it's law that you have to be a Nazi to be a German. And so trying to make it legitimate as much as possible. Okay, we're going to go on to 7th grade classes. 8th graders, don't skip out on this because I have a little assignment for you at the end of the video, okay? This is all about North and South during the antebellum period. Why did the North become a big immigration center rather than the South? It kind of came down to a little bit of geography. New York City was the main harbor where a lot of different immigrants would come in. It was not the only harbor in the United States. New Orleans, Charleston, they were all harbors, and they would all have people coming in, and so you would see immigration populations in there. But the majority of the North would go because the majority of immigrants would go to the North because that's where the jobs were, and that's where the capacity for housing people was. The South was just way more rural, and so immigrants would go to these places, and then they'd find neighborhoods of fellow immigrants. So like if you were Irish, you would find Irish neighborhoods in like New York City or Boston, and you would settle there. And it was a lot more easier to settle there than it was, for instance, like in a small town in North Carolina where everybody is of a similar makeup compared to you. What goods did most factories produce in the North at this time? Mostly textiles. That was the big thing that started the United States industrial product, which is why the South was so integral to the Northern industrial complex and why cotton was so important. Why did the South not have more industry? They didn't need it. They really didn't. They were making way too much money selling the cash crops. It just came down to, why should we invest all of our capital into building the factories and hiring the labor when we can just ship all of our product north and give it to them to do that? So it was an economic decision. The question was, why was the North more important than the South? I wouldn't say it's important. You can't work one without the other. The North was producing a lot of the materials, but you can't produce those materials without the raw items of like cotton and all that sort of stuff that you get from the South. So they work hand in hand. So this is a similar question. The next one, why did immigrants choose to settle in the North compared to the South? Wouldn't the South, being more rural, give immigrants a better opportunity to start a new life? That's true in like 1750, when most of the land wasn't settled or plotted out yet. So what had happened was, when the United States was settled, you would just start plotting out land. And so like Tennessee and Kentucky became rapidly growing states because a lot of people moved there because that was available land. Well, by the time of pre-Civil War, 1840s, most of that land is settled, most of that land is claimed, and really, unless you want to work like as a field hand, for a small farm, you're not really going to make much money that way. You can't really buy it since you don't have a lot of money for it. What percent were slaves? In the South, the African American population of the South, this is kind of in a general because there were free people of color, people who were African American or mixed race who were not slaves. But the average, most of the statistics I've looked at have said that the population was like 1 out of every 3 Southerner was African American. And so you would say that a large percentage of that population during this time was slaves. Okay. What was the most produced item in the North? And that would have been textiles, your fabrics, your cloth, things like that. What was the craziest item produced in the North? One thing I'll get, so I don't really know how to answer this one, but I'll give you guys a story that's kind of an answer to this one. You may have heard the term mad as a hatter, or like the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland. And the reason it's called a Mad Hatter, and this kind of goes back to textile, is that they would put mercury on the top hats that people were really like to wear back then, and the mercury would seep into people's scalps and make them crazy. So that's where the phrase "mad as a hatter" comes from. So that kind of answers that question. All right, so 7th graders, make sure you're going all the way down to the end of the video. I got a little assignment for you guys at the end. Okay. Number 6. Got 6th grade. We're talking about Egypt. How many gods did the Egyptians worship? More than, I think there was a range from like a dozen to like 20 established gods, and then there were some times where like they worshiped this guy named Amun-Ra, and he was kind of like the singular god, and then they'd also worship all the pharaohs as gods. So yeah, it was one of those things where it just kind of depended on the era. You had a lot of different religious icons and deities that they worshipped. What were the pyramids hollow, or were the tunnels and hollow, or were there tunnels and hallways inside? Yeah, the pyramids had passageways, caverns, things like that. They were storage. However, most of it's at the bottom section of the pyramid because it's kind of hard to keep the structure supported if it can't, rest on each other. Okay. Peyton has maybe my favorite question of the day, so congratulations, Peyton. Why did they take out all of the person's organs when mummifying them? It's a great question. This is kind of gross, so skip next 30 seconds if you don't want to know. Because organs decompose. Basically, you take out all the organs so that you just have the skin and bones in there. And so basically you turn it into like people jerky. So that they would also put the organs in like ceremonial jars that just kind of keep as for them to use in the afterlife. So it was kind of gross. All right, excellent question. Has a pharaoh ever died and was not put into a tomb or pyramid? I would imagine, especially during the periods between the Old Kingdom, Middle Kingdom, and New Kingdom, where the pyramids weren't being built as rapidly, but also before Egypt was conquered by the Romans, their pharaohs were not put in tombs like the pyramids. They were put in more like what we would call mausoleums today, which were like big stone structures, but not as big as the pyramids. The pyramids were built in the Old Kingdom, so the really old part of Egypt's history. Do pharaohs have more or less power than a king does? It depends on the pharaoh. Really does. A pharaoh could have been powerful and controlled directly, or a pharaoh could have been weak. Like some of you may know the pharaoh King Tut. He was a boy when he was pharaoh, and he died when he was like 19. So he really wasn't in charge. It was his advisors who actually ran the kingdom for him. As you know, like we probably wouldn't want to give a country control to a 19-year-old. The reason is that a country's a big place, and you can't really, especially before the internet, you can't really communicate and organize everything just by yourself. However, pharaohs did have the added bonus of being seen as gods So they had a little bit more power. And yeah, that's it for questions and answers. So this is the end of the video, but here's my assignment for you guys. On Friday, I want to do a live Zoom meeting with everybody because I miss all of your faces. So if anybody would want to do a live Zoom meeting, I'm going to set that up so that we can have a fun history discussion. And so here is what I want you guys to post underneath this video in Google Classroom as your attendance assignment. I want you guys to post what time would be the best possible time for you to do a Zoom meeting on Friday, and I'll try and find one that's the closest for everybody. And then also list a topic that you would want to talk about in that Zoom meeting. All right, so that would be one of those where like you don't have to speak, you can just turn off your video and just listen. Or if you want to ask questions live with me, feel free. So when do you want to do a Zoom meeting, and what topic would you want to talk about? So comment below as your attendance question. Or if you have further questions from this video, you can use that also as your attendance. All right, thanks guys. Bye.